So next story we have up here is about replay attacks against credit cards. This is an interesting one. You were looking at this one, Matt?
Yep. So another gem from Crimeware Security. He found someone advertising in a cybercriminal underground this software or capability that they're calling Revolution. And it seems to be an attack against the EMV payment system, but only against certain deployments of it. So EMV is the advanced, it stands for EuroPay, MasterCard, Visa. It's a standard developed to use smart card chips to authenticate payments. And they're hopefully rolling it out here in the US soon. And in particular, the attack seems to be targeted towards United States financial institutions that are somewhere in the transition of moving from MagStripe to EMV.
Right.
Europe has already kind of gone through and worked out the kinks for this sort of thing, but the US banks are still kind of figuring out the right way to do it because it's essentially a PKI, public key infrastructure problem, because each card has its own chip, and these things run code. They run, in this case, Java, and they're actually doing things, signing certificates, validating certificates, but somewhere in this chain. So what's happening is apparently there's different deployment styles of EMV, and you've got what's called a static data authentication, dynamic data authentication, and there's a combined version, which is the highest of security. Static is when you're authenticating your transactions. Every time the card sends data, it will sign the transaction, and it'll increment it's like a counter saying this is how many transactions I've performed, and this is me, and this is how I've signed it, so it's me saying this is the number of transactions, please allow this transaction.
Right.
Whereas dynamic, every time you do that again, it signs it differently, and it uses some sort of either time-based or transaction-based changing value, so to prevent replay attacks.
Almost like an RSA kind of key, some unique thing that changes over time.
Well, they are using RSA as the algorithm for this signing. I'm not really sure which aspect you're talking about, but they are changing it every time to prevent replay, which is the idea. It seems like some banks are still using the older static version, which is easier to deploy, I guess. There's certain things about PKI that...
Well, cheaper too, right? You don't have to reissue all these cards with these probably somewhat expensive chips in them.
Right. So I think that's where the blind spot is. We're not sure what this Revolution capability is, but it seems to be related to being able to load your own software onto the cards or tamper with that counter value that gets sent, so that you can just say, okay, this is another transaction, same counter value, don't worry about it. And some banks apparently are not checking the counter value, which is part of that transaction, probably to work out some of the kinks in the early stages of, is it fraud or is it just some sort of data error that we're getting? Because it's not a simple system to set up. So it sounds like the criminals have found some way of abusing the system in order to continue to create valid transactions with the same index number.
Right.
So it's interesting. I learned a lot about EMV, trying to understand exactly what was going on here. I think I found a pretty good white paper explaining some of the high-level concepts, and hopefully it'll make it into the show notes for this week.
So one of the things I saw about this as well when I was reading it is the malicious actors, they would take these stolen credit card numbers and other information, and they were submitting requests to certain banks that will accept EMV, but maybe don't really have it implemented well on the back end. And what they're doing is when they submit it, they set some kind of indicator. So they looked at what a legitimate EMV one looks like as it goes across the wire, and then they just inject this, stolen credit card information and send it along. The bank got this, request for money, and or for a transaction, and they looked at it and they said, wait a second, this guy doesn't even have an EMV chip card. This doesn't make sense because we haven't deployed these yet. How is one of our customers sending credit card information with this EMV chip based version that we haven't even sent out any cards like that to customers yet? So I think that's how they were tipped off about it. But I guess, and the other thing that they had mentioned is a lot of these financial institutions or banks that in the US that will accept EMV, they expect them to be a more higher trusted type of transaction, less likely to be rogue.
Oh, so they don't
so
do
they're
as much
not even
validation?
monitoring it quite well right now.
Yeah.
So the bad guys who are pushing through these EMV type requests with static credit card numbers kind of injected into the transaction, are getting more of them through because on the back end at the credit card companies, they don't have the stuff in place. Like you said, they're not set up quite yet for it all. Even though they're willing to honor that transaction, they don't have all this back end infrastructure in place to kind of do the security auditing and whatnot around it. So interesting. I guess once it's deployed properly, I think it's supposed to work pretty well, because I don't think they're really hacking the chip so much as they're hacking the transaction and taking advantage of some of the banks not quite being up to speed with what they're supposed to do with these types of transactions yet, or having the process in place to validate them, like you said, that the count is not, bogus of the number of transactions or other indicators therein as part of that transaction.
I'm not sure about that. I read, it was a weird, it wasn't exactly English as the first language, but the person who posted,
Right.
there was a screenshot in the Krebs article.
Yes,
and it sounded like he was saying this is a capability specific to certain kinds of cards. So
okay.
if that's the case, I mean, it may be a matter of being able to load this onto a card and walk into a store and use your EMV card with any PIN you want or whatever.
Oh, okay, interesting.
'Cause
So
he did
maybe
say
you could
something
load
about-
on whatever rogue credit card info,
Right.
stolen credit card info into a legitimate card, or whatever, a card that has one of these chips on it that you can program it to be the stolen identity, whatever.
Yep.
Is this the same as the chip and pin security, or is this slightly
Yes.
different?
This is essentially chip and pin, yeah.
There was an article like maybe years ago.
Yep. I
The
think I know the one you're thinking
presentation.
about.
Yes,
yeah.
and there was even a YouTube demonstration. But he had to carry around like a backpack with I think a laptop in it or something like that. That was like brute forcing. I was doing something to the card and the reader to get the incorrect authentications through.
That makes me wonder if it's specific to those cards, because each card has, a tiny amount of memory, a microprocessor. It may be specific to the cards because you have to load that code in, and it's more than, a typical card would need. It's all speculation at this point,
Right.
but it's interesting. I'd love to learn more about how this works, but I'm sure once that gets out, these companies will hopefully be patching this problem very quickly, or at least moving from SDA to DDA. I mean, I heard that, and I think I'm pretty sure this is correct, but I think that in Europe there was a mandate to push from SDA to DDA by like 2011. I mean, they did have an earlier start than us, but to be still running the SDA version is kind of behind the times,
Right.
no
So
matter
we're
how you
like
slice
4
it.
years behind the times here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think things are changing. I just actually a few days ago received a credit card that has the new technology. So they're all of my credit cards are slowly changing over to use the chip.
Well, I guess long and short of it is, the more security they try to add to credit cards, it's still since there's money involved, the bad actors are going to be motivated to try to figure out how to defeat that system. So maybe you're going to stop them for a little while, but they'll probably have to come up with a new system after this one, because, like you said, there's probably other ways that they can trick the system that we haven't even thought about yet. And when there's money, there's motivation. So.
Yep.